Today, I'm going to go over the process of a therapy session. There are several steps within um, this therapy session, and my name is Mary McGarry. Um, Doing this, the first step is identifying the need for therapy. Second is preparing for therapy. And third is conducting the therapy. And fourth is following up. Describing the therapy process. First step is to identify the need for therapy, which could be the individual, which would be the client, seeking therapy, or another professional um, recommending therapy for them. So it could be their own doctor or another um, professional. The second step is preparing for treatment, which is primarily this therapist's responsibility, as they read everything they can about the client and they gather history. Now, at this time, the client could have a questionnaire to fill out. So this way, the therapist would have more information about the client. The third step is opening the session. The third step, at this third step, is opening this session. If it is the first session, the therapist would start by introducing themselves. Like this is, hi, my name's Mary McGarry. I've been doing this for so long. First step is discussing the issues that led to the therapy, to the clients receiving therapy. The fifth step is to um, conduct therapy, which is just literally talking and seeing what's going on and what are the issues. After that is step six is develop the plan of action. Where do they go? Where do we go from here? Seven is the follow-up. So back to stage one. Stage one, relationship building. Therapists and clients work together to create a safe and supportive environment to build a strong relationship between the therapist and the clients. They must have trust and empathy and mutual respect. So stage one, the therapist and the client start to build the relationship. They need to have a strong, supportive environment. They must have a strong relationship with trust. The therapist can begin this first session by introducing themselves and sharing their professional background, including their experiences, education, training, anything that they would like the client to know about themselves. Then the client presents themselves. And if the client does not give enough information, the therapist can decide what questions to ask, like, are you married? Or do you have a partner? Um, do you have children? If do you work? Whom do you live with? Is your living situation stable? Is it a permanent stable, environment, or is it not stable? Do you ever have to wonder where your next meal is coming from? Do you feel safe with everyone you know and you live with? The therapist must be very open, welcoming, and non-judgmental. Even if the therapist's body language, it has to be open and caring. And the therapist cannot show any facial expressions they they wouldn't agree, that they don't agree with anything the client says. Just because they might have different views than you have to keep that to yourself. You have to have this opening relationship and respectful relationship so this would work. And because with this, if you have an opening and caring relationship, your client will trust you and be able to share more with you. So now to stage two. Stage two involves where the therapist combines the client's self-report and with information that the therapist had gathered in their readings and research on the client. Then they determine their evaluation of the client. Also, at this time, the therapist is looking for any potential mental health issues. The therapist could also ask, is there any mental health issues in the family? This is also where, they just assess, a lot of it is assessing, are they depressed? Do they have a mental illness? And there's so many mental health issues. Um, are they in therapy because they need it for court or for their children, CPS? There's a whole range of reasons why a person could be in therapy. And this is where the therapist assesses what's needed and gives them maybe a little diagnosis of what they think. And as long as the further they go along, the more they talk and the therapist gets to know this person, they get to see other sides of this client. So stage 3 is the action and commitment. Therapist and client work together to formulate realistic and achievable therapy goals. This is a step where the client and the therapist sets their goals for the clients to meet both within therapy and outside of therapy. It is essential that you set up goals that are reachable, because you don't want to have a goal that your client cannot reach or doesn't feel like they could reach. So make sure you have small goals, just so this way um, okay, a great example is if they're depressed or not wanting to do anything with their family, and maybe, you know, one night a week they have family night, or they go for a walk, or if it's couples or partners having issues, maybe, have a date night, or just give them small goals and then work up to, no fighting, no yelling, no screaming. Think about before you talk, you just always have smaller goals, then you reach for your bigger goals. Because if you reach for the bigger goals first, a lot of times they will just quit going to therapy because they feel like they're a failure. The client feels like they're a failure, and they feel like they can't um, accomplish anything, so they're not going to keep going. Stage 4. At this point, it's the intervention and problem solving. So the therapist and client work together to develop and implement a plan to address the client's concerns and goals. At this point, the plan, and if there's any intervention needed. Yes, intervention could be because of drugs or alcohol. Maybe they need some type of that, but maybe they need like WIC program or food stamps or some type of intervention. It doesn't have to be a intervention when you're having intervention. When the therapist is bringing in an intervention, it could be, housing, how if they don't have a stable housing, if the client doesn't have a stable home life, maybe you could bring in something about, either shelters or how to get on housing, so this way they can get a stable life. Again, maybe their children need more fresh fruit, maybe they just can't do it. So again, maybe WIC or food stamps, maybe something like that, or SNAP, I think it is called now, besides food stamps. And then, again, they adjust this is when the client says okay, this is my concerns. Okay, what happens if I can't be a good parent? What happens if I can't, you know, do what I have to do for the court to get my kids back. Again, this is where you break down the goals and you work one-on-one with them and you help them, maybe they have to get their GED, sorry, for them to get their kids back. So you show them how or where you can study to get for your GED, and also like parenting classes and stuff like that, just to help, or maybe even budgeting classes and stuff. You never know what intervention could be. It doesn't always have to be a bad thing. So stage 5 is termination and follow-up. um When the therapist and the client are preparing to end therapy, they set goals for the client to follow after treatment is over. They also talk about what happens if the client fails to follow the goals. First, they describe how to get back on track. And if that does not help, make sure the client knows you can always reach out to the therapist again. A lot of times, just because you end therapy doesn't mean you're cured, or maybe it's insurance that won't cover no more, or you never know. um you got as far as you could for now, or maybe you're with the counselor, you're a therapist, you're doing amazing, and the therapist and the client doesn't see the need for therapy anymore. And then once the client doesn't have the backup of the therapist, then that's when they're not meeting their goals. They're not keeping up with their responsibilities. I can give an example for this one. My son had therapy a lot of times growing up just because he's high functioning autism, and he would be doing so good. So they would say, okay, we're done. He doesn't need to come anymore. Okay, great. In a month or two, we would be back in. He just needed that outlet. Sometimes you just need that outlet. So this way you can have somebody else to talk to. That's not judgmental. That won't, you know, go and tell your stuff to everybody. Um, so, it's important, and then follow up. The therapist needs to make sure he or she finishes up, and has good notes and what was the plan that you did. So in case something happens and the client can't come back to you, there's whoever would get their file next would know this client. Okay, this is what they had, and this is what they have had. This is what they need. Um, you never know. People change jobs, people change positions. So sometimes you can't get back to your same therapist. So it's always good for the therapist to leave a good summary in their file. So this way, whoever gets the client next will know. And also, when you're ending, you just make sure your client is happy to the best of your abilities, and make sure they know they could always reach out to you. So now the last thing is to summarize everything. There's so many different steps in therapy. There's so many different types of therapy. Is it imperative that the therapist and the client work together to build a real working relationship? Because you must establish a professional relationship that's trustworthy and safe. If you do that, the client must feel welcome. And if they do that, and the um, therapist is non-judgmental, you will have a better therapy sessions overall, just because everybody, the client feels safe. So you just have to put the client first in whichever steps you do or whichever you do. Thank you.